The sky over Kelvar was the color of rust. It had been that way since the squad landed 3 days ago, and Sergeant Marcus Reyes was starting to hate the color. Rust meant dust. Dust meant it got into everything. Rifles, boots, lungs. And dust meant the enemy could hide in it. Reyes lay flat on a ridge of broken red rock, watching the valley below through his scope. Nothing moved except the wind, pushing waves of fine orange sand across the plain. Somewhere out there, 3 days ago, his squad had been dropped off to do a simple job: scout the valley, confirm the enemy supply lines, call it in, get picked up. Simple jobs did not stay simple. Not out here. "Anything?" asked Corporal Lena Diaz, crawling up beside him. She was young, maybe 24, but she had the calm eyes of someone who had already seen more war than most people saw in a lifetime. "Nothing," Reyes said, "which is worse than something." Diaz nodded. She understood. When the Drathan went quiet, it meant they were moving. And the Drathan were not slow. The Drathan compact was not human. They were tall, thin things with gray skin and 6 limbs, 4 of which ended in long claws made for climbing rock and metal alike. They did not fly ships like humans did. They grew them, in some strange way no human scientist had fully explained. Their weapons fired bursts of plasma that could melt straight through standard-issue armor. And worst of all, they did not run. They did not retreat. When a human unit engaged the Drathan, the fight always ended one of 2 ways. The Drathan died, or the humans did. 3 days ago, Ghost Squad, call sign for the 12-person recon team Reyes commanded, had been inserted by dropship near the edge of a Drathan supply route. The mission had been clean: get in, watch, record troop movement, get out. But halfway through their second night, the dropship that was supposed to come back for them never did. Command said there had been a battle in orbit, a big one. The human fleet guarding this system had been pushed back, hard, by a larger Drathan force nobody had expected. Every ship that could still fly had been ordered to retreat and regroup at the rally point, 3 systems away. That left Ghost Squad on the ground, alone. 12 soldiers on a hostile world, with no ship, no fleet, and an enemy that owned the sky. "Sarge," Private Tomas Cade's voice came over the short-range radio, tight and low. "Movement to the east. Looks like a patrol. Maybe 15 of them." Reyes turned his scope east. Cade was right. A line of gray shapes moved across the ridge in the distance, weapons up, moving in the strange gliding walk the Drathan used when they were hunting. "They're not patrolling," Diaz muttered. "They're looking for us." Reyes felt his stomach tighten. 3 days without a resupply drop. 3 days of hiding in caves and gullies, eating ration bars that tasted like cardboard, drinking water that was starting to run low. And now the enemy knew, or at least suspected, that there were humans still on the ground. "Fall back to the cave system," Reyes ordered over the squad channel. "Slow and quiet. No one fires unless fired on." One by one, the soldiers of Ghost Squad melted away from their positions and moved deeper into the maze of red rock canyons that cut through this part of the valley. It had taken them a full day to find this cave system, a natural maze of tunnels carved out by some ancient underground river, long since dried up. It was the best hiding spot they had found, and it might be the only thing keeping them alive. Inside the main cave, the squad gathered in a loose circle. 12 faces, tired and dusty, looked at Reyes for orders. He didn't have many good ones to give. "Water report," he said. 2 days, if we're careful," said Corporal Ines Okafor, the squad's medic and supply officer. "Food's about the same. Maybe 3 if we skip a meal." "Ammo?" "We're fine on ammo," said Cade. "It's everything else we're short on." Reyes nodded slowly. He looked around the cave at his people. Diaz, sharp and steady. Cade, young but reliable. Okafor, always thinking 2 steps ahead. And the others, Private Sam Whitfield, who never stopped making jokes even when things were bad. Corporal Priya Nair, the squad's best shot. Private Elias Grant, quiet and watchful. And the rest, good soldiers all of them, now trapped on a planet that wanted them dead. "We keep trying the long-range radio," Reyes said. "Someone has to still be listening. The fleet can't have left the system completely." "And if they did?" Whitfield asked, not joking this time. Reyes didn't answer right away. The truth was, he didn't know. Command had not sent a message in almost 2 days. That silence was starting to feel less like bad luck, and more like an answer nobody wanted to say out loud. 200 light-years away, in a part of space most human maps simply marked as unclaimed, a ship drifted at the edge of a dead star system. It was long and black, its hull scarred with the marks of 100 battles that had never been reported to any official record. Its name, painted in faded letters near the bow, was the Widow's Reach. Most human soldiers had heard of the Widow's Reach, even if they had never seen it. It was not part of the regular fleet. It did not follow the regular chain of command. It was crewed by soldiers who had been given a choice: spend the rest of their lives in a military prison, or serve on a ship that took the missions no one else would take. Missions with no rules. Missions where the only goal was to win, by whatever means necessary. People called the crew of the Widow's Reach many things: criminals, ghosts, monsters. The Draythan, in their own strange language, had a word for the ship that translated roughly to the thing that does not stop. Other human captains avoided the Widow's Reach when they could. It was not a ship you wanted watching your back, because you were never quite sure what it would do. On the bridge, Commander Arya Voss sat in her chair, one boot resting on the edge of the console in front of her, reading a data pad with the report of the day. She was not a tall woman, but she carried herself like someone twice her size, and her crew, hardened as they were, did not question her orders twice. "Commander," said the ship's communications officer, a wiry man named Petrov, who had once been a smuggler before he was a soldier. "We're picking up a distress beacon. Old signal, weak, but it's human." Voss looked up. "Location?" "Kelvar system, 3rd planet. Signal says it's a ground unit. 12 souls, requesting immediate extraction." Voss set down her data pad. "Kelvar, that's Drathan territory now, isn't it?" "As of 4 days ago, yes, Commander." Fleet Command pulled back after the battle at the Outer Ring. Kelvar was left behind. The bridge went quiet. Everyone knew what left behind meant. It meant no rescue was coming. It meant 12 soldiers had been written off, filed under acceptable losses, and forgotten. "Do we have orders regarding this system?" Voss asked. Petrov checked his console. "No current orders, Commander." "Kelvar isn't part of our assigned patrol route." Voss stood up from her chair and walked to the main viewport, looking out at the stars. She had been a soldier long enough to know how the math worked. 12 people on the ground, no fleet support, deep in enemy territory. Any sane commander would call that a lost cause and move on to missions they could actually win. But Arya Voss had never been accused of being sane. That was, in part, why she commanded this ship instead of a normal one. "Set a course for Kelvar," she said. "Commander, that's outside our patrol zone. Command hasn't authorized." "Command isn't here," Voss said flatly. "I am. Set the course." There was a brief pause on the bridge, the kind of pause that came before a decision that would matter. Then Petrov nodded and began entering coordinates. "Aye, Commander. Course set for Kelvar." Voss looked back out at the stars, her jaw set. She had read enough reports about the Draythan to know what waited for them at Kelvar. A hostile fleet, a hostile ground force, a world that did not want humans on it, alive or dead. It didn't matter. The Widow's Reach had earned its reputation by going where no one else would go, and doing what no one else was willing to do. If there were still soldiers alive down there, she was not going to let them die, simply because paperwork said the system was abandoned. "Engineering," she said into the ship comm. "I want full power to the engines, within the hour. We have a long way to go, and not much time to get there." Back on Kelvar, night had fallen, and with it came a cold that cut through even the best cold weather gear. Reyes sat near the mouth of the cave, watching the darkness outside, listening for any sound that didn't belong. Diaz sat beside him, her rifle across her knees. "You think anyone's still listening?" she asked quietly. Reyes didn't answer right away. He thought about the radio operator back on the last ship he'd served on, a young woman who used to say that somewhere out there, someone was always listening, even when it didn't feel like it. He wanted to believe that. He wasn't sure he did anymore. "Doesn't matter if they are," he finally said. "We keep sending the signal either way, because the moment we stop, that's when we've really given up." Diaz nodded slowly. "And if no one comes?" "Then we walk out of here ourselves," Reyes said. "There's a human outpost 200 kilometers north. last I heard. If it's still standing, we make for it. 200 kilometers, on foot, through Drathan territory. You have a better plan, Corporal? Diaz almost smiled. No, Sarge. Just checking you're as crazy as the rest of us. From deeper in the cave, Cade's voice suddenly rose, sharp with excitement. Sarge! Sarge, get in here! Reyes and Diaz scrambled back into the cave to find Cade hunched over the long-range radio, headphones pressed tight to his ears, his face lit up by the small glow of the receiver's display. What is it? Reyes asked. I got something, Cade said, his voice shaking slightly. A response. It's faint. It's garbled. But it's real. Someone answered our beacon. The whole squad crowded around him now, holding their breath. Play it, Reyes said. Cade flipped a switch, and static filled the cave, along with a broken voice, cutting in and out. Unidentified ground unit. This is Reach, receiving your distress signal. Hold position. We are inbound. The message cut off into static again. Cade worked the dials, trying to bring it back, but the signal was gone. For a long moment, no one in the cave spoke. 12 tired, hungry, dust-covered soldiers stood frozen, staring at the radio, as if it might say more, if they just wished hard enough. Did that say what I think it said? Whitfield finally asked. Someone's coming, Okafor said quietly. Someone actually heard us. Reyes felt something loosen in his chest that had been tight for 3 days. Hope. It was a small thing, fragile, easily broken. But it was there. Did you catch the ship name? He asked Cade. Cade frowned, replaying the fragment in his memory. I think it said Reach, like it was cut off. Could be Widow's Reach? The mood in the cave shifted instantly. A few of the younger soldiers exchanged uneasy looks. Even Diaz's easy calm flickered for a moment. The Widow's Reach? Nair repeated. That's the prison ship. The one they send when they don't care what happens to anybody, including their own crew. I've heard stories, Grant said quietly. They say that ship doesn't take prisoners, doesn't leave survivors, not on either side. Reyes held up a hand before the murmuring could spread further. I've heard the stories too. I've also heard that the Widow's Reach has pulled more soldiers out of dead-end situations than any 3 regular ships combined. Whatever else it is, it comes when other ships don't. So, we're pinning our lives on a ship full of criminals, Whitfield muttered. We're pinning our lives on whoever answers the call, Reyes said firmly. Right now, that's the only ship that has. I'll take criminals who come over heroes who don't. No one argued with that. There wasn't much to argue with. Out here, on a world that wanted them dead, help was help, no matter where it came from. Keep the beacon running, Reyes ordered. Rotate radio watch every 2 hours. The rest of us rest while we can. If that ship really is coming, we need to be ready to move the second it gets here. The squad broke apart to their positions, some trying to sleep, others taking up watch at the cave entrance. Reyes remained by the radio a while longer, staring at the small green light that meant the beacon was still transmitting, still calling out into the dark, still hoping someone would hear. Far above the planet, past the reach of any human radar station still operating in the system, the Widow's Reach burned through the void, at speeds that would have torn apart a lesser ship. Commander Voss stood on the bridge, watching the growing dot on the star chart that marked Kelvar, and behind her, the crew of the most feared ship in the human fleet, prepared for a fight that official records would say never should have happened. Whatever waited for them at Kelvar, a Drathan fleet, a hostile planet, 12 soldiers clinging to survival, the Widow's Reach was coming. It always came. That was, in the end, the only reputation that mattered. The rust-colored sky over Kelvar did not know it yet, but it was about to get a lot more crowded. Reyes did not sleep much that night. He sat near the radio, listening to the faint hum of the beacon, and let his mind wander back to how Ghost Squad had ended up on this world in the first place. It had started simply enough. Command wanted eyes on a Drathan supply line that ran through the Kelvar system, a route the enemy used to move fuel and parts to their forward bases along the border. 12 soldiers, a quiet drop, 3 days of watching, then extraction. That was the plan. Plans, Reyes had learned a long time ago, were only useful until the enemy did something unexpected. What no one had expected was the size of the Drathan fleet that appeared at the edge of the system on the second night. Scouts reported it first as a routine patrol, then as a larger formation, Then, within hours, as a full battle group far bigger than anything Command's intelligence had predicted. The human fleet stationed to guard the system, already stretched thin from other engagements along the border, had no choice but to fall back and regroup, rather than risk losing every ship they had in a fight they could not win. Reyes understood the decision. He might have made the same call, if the responsibility had been his. That did not make it easier to be the one left behind because of it. He thought about the soldiers under his command, the ones sleeping fitfully around him in the dark of the cave. Diaz, sharp and steady, who had transferred into his squad 2 years ago after her previous unit had been wiped out in an ambush, not unlike this one. Cade, barely out of basic training, still young enough to believe things would work out if you just held on long enough. Okafor, who had once told him that she joined the medical corps because she was tired of watching soldiers die from wounds that could have been treated if someone competent had been there in time. Whitfield, whose jokes had gotten the whole squad through worse moments than this one, even if his humor was starting to wear thin under the weight of hunger and fear. Nair, quiet and precise, the best shot in the squad, and proud of it. Grant, who rarely spoke unless he had something worth saying, which usually meant it was important, and the rest, good people, every one of them, now depending on Reyes to get them through a situation that had no easy answers. He thought, too, about the 2 names that were not with them anymore. Corporal Danny Reyes, no relation, just a strange coincidence of names that had made for more than a few jokes in the mess hall, and Private Amara Solis, both lost in the first chaotic hours of the ambush, when the squad had scattered under heavy fire, and not everyone had made it to the rally point. Reyes carried those names quietly, the way soldiers learn to carry such things, folding them into the part of himself that kept fighting even when it hurt to keep going. By the time the pale orange dawn began to creep across the cave entrance, Reyes had made peace, as much as anyone could, with the uncertainty ahead. Whatever came next, rescue, or the long walk toward the northern outpost, or something worse than either, Ghost Squad would face it together, the way they had faced everything else since landing on this unforgiving world. Far above, in the black of open space, the Widow's Reach was not the only ship taking notice of the situation at Kelvar. Word of the abandoned system had begun to spread quietly through certain channels, the kind of informal networks that existed between soldiers and crews who had learned not to always trust the official reports. A supply captain running cargo near the rally point had mentioned, almost in passing, that an entire recon squad had been left behind when the fleet pulled back. A comms technician had flagged an old distress beacon still transmitting from the surface, buried in a stack of signals marked low priority. None of it had reached anyone with the authority, or the will, to act on it, until it reached the Widow's Reach. Commander Voss did not put much faith in official priority markings. She had spent too many years watching soldiers get filed away as acceptable losses, to trust that the system would always do right by the people wearing its uniform. When Petrov flagged the signal from Kelvar, faint and old as it was, Voss had not hesitated long before making her decision. It was, in many ways, the same decision she had made a dozen times before, on a dozen different worlds, each time drawing the same disapproving looks from Fleet Command and the same quiet gratitude from the soldiers she brought home. It was, perhaps, the only kind of decision that had ever truly defined her career. As the ship pushed deeper into the outer edge of the Kelvar system, Voss walked the length of the Widow's Reach, checking in with her crew, making sure every station was ready for whatever waited for them at the end of this journey. She passed Chen in the pilot's ready room, running calculations for the approach vector. She passed Marlowe in the armory, checking over the ship's weapon systems with the careful attention of a man who trusted machines more than most people. She passed young Ortiz, barely more than a boy by most standards, cleaning his rifle with the focused intensity of someone determined not to let his commander down. They were not the kind of crew most fleet officers would have chosen. Criminals, cast-offs, soldiers who had made mistakes serious enough to end up here instead of somewhere else. But they were, in Voss's experience, some of the most reliable people she had ever served with, precisely because they understood, better than most, what it felt like to be written off by people who should have known better. She intended to make sure that 12 more soldiers did not learn that lesson the hard way. Morning on Kelvar did not bring warmth. It brought a pale orange light that crept slowly across the rocks, and with it, the sound of movement outside the cave. Reyes woke to Grant's hand on his shoulder, shaking him gently. "Sarge, you need to see this." Reyes rubbed the grit from his eyes and followed Grant to the mouth of the cave, staying low behind the rocks. Below, in the valley, they had been watching 2 days before. A large group of Drathan soldiers had set up what looked like a temporary camp. Gray shapes moved between strange organic-looking structures that seemed to have grown out of the ground itself, rather than being built. "That's a lot more than a patrol," Grant said quietly. Reyes studied the camp through his scope. He counted at least 60 Drathan, maybe more, along with several of their walking machines. Tall, spider-like constructs the humans called striders, used for hauling equipment and, when needed, for fighting. This was not a patrol looking for stray humans. This was a forward base. "They're settling in," Reyes muttered, "which means they think they have time to spare. Or they know something we don't," Diaz said, crouching beside him. Reyes lowered his scope. His mind ran through the possibilities. If the Drathan were building a forward base this deep into what used to be contested territory, it likely meant they believed the system was fully theirs now. No human fleet coming back, no resistance expected, just mop-up work, clearing out anything human that remained. That included 12 soldiers hiding in a cave. "We stay hidden," Reyes said. "No movement outside except for water and radio watch. If that ship really is coming, we need this camp not to notice us before it gets here." "And if it takes days?" Okafor asked. "Our supplies won't last." "Then we ration harder," Reyes said. "We've survived on less." The squad settled into a grim, careful rhythm. They kept 2 people on watch at all times, one on the cave entrance and one on the long-range radio, hoping for another fragment of that garbled message. The rest tried to eat as little as they could manage, tried not to think too hard about the 60-plus enemy soldiers camped less than 2 kilometers away. By midday, Cade managed to get a second, slightly clearer transmission. "Ghost Squad, this is Widow's Reach actual, receiving your beacon, estimated arrival, standard days, hold position and stay hidden. Help is coming." The message was still broken in places, but it was enough. Confirmation. The Widow's Reach truly was coming for them, and it gave them something concrete, an estimate, even a rough one, of when help might arrive. "Standard days," Whitfield repeated. "That's not exactly a number, Sarge." "It's more than we had yesterday," Reyes said. "Focus on that." While Ghost Squad kept low in their cave, far above the planet, the Widow's Reach raced through the outer edges of the Kelvar system, cutting its engines only when its sensors detected the first signs of a Drathan fleet presence. On the bridge, Commander Voss studied the tactical display, a holographic map showing the positions of every ship the Widow's Reach had detected so far. There were more than she had hoped, and fewer than she had feared. A moderate Drathan fleet, spread out to guard key points around the planet, with heavier concentrations near what looked like 2 large ground installations. "Report," Voss said. Her tactical officer, a broad-shouldered man named Dax Marlowe, who had once served 15 years in a fleet penal colony, before being reassigned to the Widow's Reach, looked up from his console. "Counting 23. Confirmed Drathan warships in orbit, Commander. Mix of escort class and 2 larger vessels that read as command ships. Ground sensors are picking up at least 2 major installations on the surface, plus smaller camps. And our ground team? Signal puts them roughly 40 kilometers from the nearest large installation. Small cave system, matches the terrain scans. No sign yet that the Drathan know they're there." Voss nodded slowly, turning the numbers over in her head. 23 warships was more than the Widow's Reach could fight head-on and win. But head-on was rarely how this ship did things. "Options," she said. Marlowe pulled up a rough plan on the display. "If we come in loud, we draw every ship in that fleet down on us, before we're anywhere near the ground team. If we come in quiet, we might be able to slip past their outer patrols, especially if we time it with one of their supply runs. Problem is, quiet takes longer, and longer means our people on the ground have to hold out that much more time." "How much longer?" 2, maybe 3 additional days, Commander." Voss studied the display in silence. Every option in front of her carried a cost. Loud meant a fight the Widow's Reach might not win outright, but one that would draw enemy attention away from a small ground team just long enough to matter. Quiet meant a safer approach for the ship, but more days of waiting for 12 soldiers running low on food, water, and luck. We split it, Voss finally said, half loud, half quiet. Marlowe raised an eyebrow. Commander? We send a decoy signal out toward the edge of the system, Voss explained, tracing a line on the display with her finger. Make it look like a larger human force is moving in from the outer ring, enough to pull a portion of their fleet away to investigate. While they're distracted, we come in low and quiet on the far side of the planet, out of their main patrol routes, and make our way to the ground team from there. That's going to take some very good flying, Marlowe said, a small smile crossing his face. Good thing we've got the best pilot in this arm of the galaxy. Get me Chen, Voss said. Moments later, a small woman with sharp eyes and quick hands stepped onto the bridge. Lieutenant Mei Chen, the Widow's Reach's chief pilot, infamous across 3 star systems for flying maneuvers that most simulators refuse to even model as survivable. You wanted me, Commander? Chen asked, already grinning. She could tell from the tension on the bridge that whatever was coming, it would not be simple. I need you to fly this ship through a gap in an enemy patrol net that is maybe wide enough to fit us, while towing a decoy signal that needs to look convincing from 20 light minutes away, Voss said. Can you do it? Chen's grin widened. Commander, you say that like it's a hard question. 2 more days passed on Kelvar, each one harder than the last. Water ran low first, forcing the squad to ration down to barely enough to survive the heat of midday. Food followed close behind. On the 3rd day, Whitfield's usual jokes had mostly stopped, replaced by a tired silence that had settled over the whole squad. It was on that 3rd day that the Draythan finally found them. It started with a distant sound, a low mechanical whine that Reyes recognized instantly as one of the enemy's Strider machines. He motioned for silence, and the squad froze in place, listening as the sound grew slowly closer, then paused, then moved away again. Patrol, Diaz whispered. Just a patrol. But an hour later, the sound returned, closer this time, and with it came voices, harsh, clicking Draythan speech, carried faintly on the wind. Reyes crept to the cave entrance and looked out carefully. A group of 6 Draythan soldiers stood at the base of the ridge, studying the ground. One of them crouched down, examining something in the dirt. Reyes's stomach dropped. Footprints. Someone had been careless, or the wind simply hadn't covered their tracks well enough. Contact, he whispered over the squad channel. 6 hostiles, base of the ridge, looking at our tracks. Everyone stay still. No one fires unless I give the order. The squad held their positions, weapons ready but silent, as the Draythan soldiers spread out, moving closer to the cave entrance. Reyes watched through a narrow gap in the rocks, as one of them pointed directly at the cave mouth and said something sharp in their clicking language. They knew, or they were close enough to knowing that it made no difference. Reyes made his decision fast. On my mark. First fire team takes the 2 on the left. Second team takes the 2 on the right. Diaz and I take the center pair. We drop them fast, before they can call it in. A tense silence stretched out as the Draythan soldiers crept closer, weapons raised, moving with the same slow, careful gait they used when hunting. Mark, Reyes whispered. The cave erupted with gunfire. 6 shots rang out almost as one, and all 6 Draythan soldiers dropped before any of them could raise an alarm. For a moment, the valley went silent, except for the ringing echo of gunfire bouncing off rock. Clear, Diaz called quietly. That's not going unnoticed, Okafor said grimly. Someone's going to come looking for that patrol. Reyes knew she was right. The gunshots alone would have carried far in the thin air, and even if they hadn't, the missing patrol would raise questions soon enough. Their hiding place, safe for 3 days, was no longer safe at all. We move, Reyes ordered. Grab everything. We're not coming back here. The squad packed quickly, shouldering what little gear and supplies they had left, and moved out of the cave system, just as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the rust-colored sky in deep shades of orange and red. They had no clear destination now except away, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the dead patrol before the Draythan came looking in force. Somewhere out there, 40 kilometers away by the ship's best estimate, help was still coming. They just had to survive long enough to reach it, or for it to reach them. Aboard the Widow's Reach, Voss received the update from her sensor officer with a tightening jaw. Ground team reports enemy contact. 6 hostiles eliminated, but they've had to abandon their position. They're moving on foot, exact heading unknown. Time until we're in position to reach them? Voss asked. At current pace, 6 hours, Commander. Assuming Chen's flight plan holds. It'll hold, Voss said. She turned to the comm officer. Get me a channel to the ground team. I want them to know we're close, and I want to know exactly where they're headed. Petrov worked at his console, adjusting frequencies, trying to punch a clear signal through the growing static of a system now buzzing with Drathan patrol chatter, searching for the source of 6 dead soldiers. Channel open, Commander. It's weak, but it should hold long enough. Voss leaned toward the comm panel. Ghost Squad, this is Commander Voss of the Widow's Reach. We are 6 hours out and closing. Say your position and status. For a long moment, there was only static. Then, faint but clear enough to understand, Reyes's voice came through. Widow's Reach, this is Sergeant Reyes. Ghost Squad actual. We are on the move. Direction north-northeast from our last position, moving toward higher ground. We have wounded, low supplies, and an unknown number of hostiles converging on our last known location. We could use that 6 hours to be a lot shorter, if you've got it in you. A small, sharp smile crossed Voss's face, the kind of expression her crew had learned to both respect and fear. Sergeant, she said into the comm, you let us worry about making up time. You focus on staying alive long enough for us to get there. Widows reach out. She turned to Chen, who was already grinning at the challenge in Voss's eyes. You heard the sergeant, Voss said. 6 hours just became 5. Can you make that work? Chen cracked her knuckles, eyes bright with the kind of excitement most sane pilots would never admit to feeling before a dangerous flight through hostile territory. Commander, she said, watch me. The Widow's Reach banked hard, engines flaring bright against the darkness of space, cutting a path toward the planet below, where 12 exhausted soldiers were running for their lives, across a world that had never wanted them there in the first place. Aboard the ship, as Chen worked out the details of her decoy maneuver, Voss made her way down to the crew quarters, where Marlowe was going over weapon loadouts with Ortiz and a few of the younger crew members. The mood in the room was tense but focused, the kind of quiet readiness that came from soldiers who had been through enough dangerous operations to know exactly what was expected of them. You really think we can pull off both halves of this plan? Marlowe asked, when Voss stopped by his station. Loud and quiet at the same time is a tall order, Commander, even for us. We've done harder things, Voss said. Remember the extraction at Thessaly Point? 4 ships against us, no decoy at all, and we still got everyone out. Barely, Marlowe said, a faint smile crossing his weathered face. I still have the scar from that one. Everyone on this ship has a scar from something, Voss said. That's not going to change today. What matters is, we do the job, same as always. Ortiz, still fairly new to the crew, looked between the two of them with the mixture of nervousness and curiosity that marked him as someone who hadn't yet earned the kind of easy confidence the veteran crew members carried. Commander, can I ask something?
Go ahead.
Why do we do this? I mean, he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Everyone says this ship takes the missions no one else wants. Missions where command's already decided the people down there aren't worth saving. Why bother, when it's not even our job? Voss considered the question for a moment before answering. Because someone decided, a long time ago, that some lives are cheaper to save than others, that some missions aren't worth the risk, some soldiers aren't worth the fuel it takes to go back for them. I don't accept that math, Ortiz. Never have. If there's a beacon out there, and there's any way at all to reach it, this ship goes. That's not going to change, no matter what the official orders say. Ortiz nodded slowly, seeming to turn the answer over in his mind. That's why people call this ship dangerous, isn't it? Because we don't play by those rules. That's exactly why, Marlowe said, checking the charge on his rifle one more time. And it's also why, when the day comes that any one of us is the one stranded on some rock with no fleet coming, we can trust this crew will be the one that shows up anyway. The conversation settled into a comfortable silence after that, each of them returning to their preparations as the ship continued its approach toward Kelvar. Voss moved on to check the remaining stations, satisfied that her crew, whatever their pasts, understood exactly what kind of ship they served on, and exactly why it mattered. Back on the surface, Ghost Squad pushed on through the night, moving as quickly as their exhaustion would allow along the ridgeline that Voss had directed them toward. The terrain grew rougher the higher they climbed, loose rock shifting underfoot, forcing the squad to move carefully, even as the pressure of pursuit weighed on every step. "How's Whitfield holding up?" Reyes asked quietly, falling back to check on Okafor, who was helping support the wounded soldier along the difficult terrain. "He's tougher than he looks," Okafor said, "but he needs proper medical attention soon. That wound's not life-threatening yet, but it will be if we don't get him somewhere with real supplies." "The ship's coming," Reyes said, more to reassure himself than anyone else. "We just need to hold on a little longer." They pressed on through the darkness, the only sounds the crunch of boots on loose stone, and the distant, occasional echo of Draythan patrol chatter carried on the wind from somewhere behind them. Nair took point, her sharp eyes scanning the terrain ahead for any sign of ambush, while Grant brought up the rear, watching their back trail for pursuit. It was Cade, walking near the middle of the formation with the radio strapped to his pack, who first noticed something odd about the sky. "Sarge," he said quietly, tapping Reyes on the shoulder and pointing upward. "Look." Reyes followed his gaze and saw it too. A faint flare of light high above, followed by a distant rumble that sounded nothing like thunder. A ship, moving fast, cutting through the upper atmosphere. "That's not Draythan," Diaz said, coming up beside them, her eyes fixed on the same distant light. "Draythan ships don't move like that." "No," Reyes agreed, feeling something like hope stir in his chest, for the first time in what felt like days. "That's ours." The squad picked up their pace, renewed energy pushing them forward despite their exhaustion, every one of them watching the sky, as the distant light grew slowly, steadily closer. Not far from where the human soldiers pushed on through the darkness, a Draythan officer named Skreth stood at the edge of the forward camp, studying a report handed to him by a junior soldier. 6 of his soldiers, sent to investigate the abandoned cave system where human tracks had been spotted, had failed to report in on schedule. Skreth was not, by the standards of his own people, a particularly cruel commander. He fought because his people had been fighting humans for longer than his own lifetime, in a war neither side fully remembered the true beginning of anymore. But he was thorough, and thoroughness told him that 6 missing soldiers, combined with the sound of gunfire reported by a distant patrol, meant the humans they had been hunting were still alive, and were not going quietly. "Send a larger force," he ordered, his clicking voice carrying the particular sharpness of a commander who did not like surprises. "Track them along the ridgeline. I want them found before they reach whatever help they believe is coming." The junior soldier hesitated. "Sir, there are reports of unusual signal activity in the upper atmosphere. Possible human vessel." Skreth's attention sharpened at that. "A vessel? Here?" The human fleet withdrew from this system days ago. "Unconfirmed, sir. Orbital Watch reports a single contact, moving fast, evading standard patrol routes." Skreth considered this new information carefully. A single ship, moving alone through contested territory the humans had supposedly abandoned, could mean many things. A scout, a mistake, or, more troubling, a deliberate attempt to retrieve the very soldiers his forces were currently hunting. "Alert the orbital patrol," he said. "If that vessel is what I suspect it is, I want it intercepted long before it reaches this planet's surface, and find those humans on the ridge. I do not intend to explain to my superiors how 12 soldiers slipped through our grasp because we were too slow." The order went out swiftly, and within the hour, additional Draythan forces began converging on the ridgeline from multiple directions, while orbital patrols adjusted their routes to watch more carefully for any unauthorized vessel entering the system's outer edge. Neither side yet knew exactly how close the coming collision would be, but both understood, in their own ways, that the next few hours would decide everything. Back aboard the Widow's Reach, as the ship continued its careful approach, Voss received updated sensor reports that confirmed her worst suspicion. The Draythan had noticed their presence sooner than she had hoped. "They've adjusted their orbital patrol pattern, Commander," Petrov reported. "Looks like they're specifically watching for unauthorized entry now. Our decoy signal bought us some time, but not as much as we wanted." "How much time do we actually have?" Voss asked. "Maybe an hour before their adjusted patrols start actively searching this approach vector," Petrov said. "After that, it becomes considerably harder to reach the surface without a direct confrontation." Voss's jaw tightened slightly. An hour was not much room to work with, especially with Ghost Squad's exact position still shifting as they moved along the ridge, evading their own pursuers on the ground. "Chen," she said, "time to make good on that flying reputation of yours. We need to be on the ground, extraction underway, within that hour." "Already on it, Commander," Chen said, adjusting the ship's course with quick, confident movements. "Just say the word when you want me to stop being careful and start being fast." "The word is now," Voss said. The Widow's Reach surged forward, abandoning the last of its careful, quiet approach in favor of speed, cutting directly toward the planet's surface as the countdown toward Ghost Squad's rescue, and toward a fight neither side could fully avoid, continued to tick steadily down. The higher ground turned out to be a long ridge of broken stone that rose above the valley floor, like the spine of some long-dead animal. Ghost Squad climbed it as fast as their tired legs would carry them, weapons ready, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit. "Sarge, we've got movement behind us," Nair called from the rear of the formation. "Looks like they found the dead patrol." Reyes looked back and saw what she meant. Far behind them, at the base of the ridge near the cave they had abandoned, a swarm of gray shapes had gathered, moving with the quick, agitated motion of soldiers who had just discovered their comrades were dead. "They'll be tracking us within the hour," Diaz said grimly. "Then we keep moving," Reyes said. "Every kilometer we put between us and them is a kilometer the ship doesn't have to fight through to reach us." The squad pushed on, climbing higher along the ridge, their breaths coming hard and fast in the thin air. Okafor kept a close eye on Private Sam Whitfield, who had taken a glancing shot to the shoulder during the ambush at the cave, and was starting to slow down, though he refused to admit it. "I'm fine," Whitfield insisted, when Okafor tried to check the wound again. "Just a scratch." "Your scratch is bleeding through your second bandage," Okafor said flatly. "Sit down for 1 minute and let me look at it properly, or you're not going to make it to that extraction point at all." Whitfield sat, grumbling, while Okafor worked quickly to redress the wound. The rest of the squad kept watch, weapons trained on the valley below and the ridgeline ahead, alert for any sign of Drathan scouts who might have circled around to cut them off. "Radio check," Reyes said, and Cade brought the long-range set online again, listening intently through the static. "Widow's Reach, this is Ghost Squad, radio check, over." For a moment there was only silence, and Reyes felt the familiar tightness return to his chest. Then, clearer than any transmission they'd received so far, Voss's voice came through. "Ghost Squad, this is Widow's Reach actual. We are entering the outer atmosphere now. Estimated time to your position, 90 minutes. Continue toward the ridgeline, and hold position at the highest point you can safely reach. We will find you. 90 minutes. After days of waiting, after the endless uncertainty of whether help was even truly coming, 90 minutes felt almost impossibly close. "Copy that, Widow's Reach," Reyes said, allowing himself the smallest flicker of relief. "We'll be waiting." High above Kelvar, the Widow's Reach cut through the thin upper atmosphere, its hull glowing faintly from the friction of entry. On the bridge, every console blinked with warnings, as Drathan sensor stations across the planet began picking up the intrusion. "They've spotted us, Commander," Marlowe said. "2 escort ships, breaking off from the nearest orbital patrol to intercept." "Let them come," Voss said calmly. "Chen, keep us low and fast. I don't want to fight in open sky if we can avoid it." "Copy, Commander," Chen said, her hands moving quickly across the flight controls. The Widow's Reach dipped lower, skimming close to the mountain ranges that cut across Kelvar's surface, using the terrain to break the line of sight from the pursuing escort ships. "They're gaining," Marlowe warned. The display showed the 2 Drathan escorts closing the distance rapidly, weapon systems already charging. "Distance to intercept?" 90 seconds, Commander." Voss's eyes narrowed as she studied the terrain ahead on the tactical display. A long, narrow canyon carved between 2 mountain ranges, barely wide enough for a ship of this size to pass through safely. "Chen, take us through the canyon," Voss ordered. Chen glanced at the display, then at Voss, a slow grin spreading across her face. "Commander, that gap is tight even by my standards." "Which is exactly why they won't expect us to try it," Voss said. "Do it." The Widow's Reach banked hard, diving into the canyon at a speed that would have been suicidal for almost any other pilot to attempt. Rock walls flashed past on either side, close enough that the crew could see individual cracks and ridges in the stone. Behind them, the two Draythan escort ships hesitated at the canyon entrance, unwilling to risk the same maneuver at full speed, and fell back to search for another route around. "We lost them," Marlowe reported, a note of genuine surprise in his voice. "For now," Voss said. "That won't last. Time to ground team's position?" 20 minutes, Commander. If Chen keeps flying like that." "I always fly like this," Chen said cheerfully, easing the ship out of the canyon and back onto a course, toward the distant ridgeline, where Ghost Squad waited. On the ground, the ridge had become a battlefield sooner than Reyes had hoped. A larger Draythan force, alerted by the destroyed patrol and the growing commotion in the sky above, had finally caught up to the fleeing squad, cutting off their path along the ridge with a line of soldiers and two of the tall, spider-like Strider machines. "Contact front," Nair shouted, opening fire as the first wave of Draythan soldiers crested the ridge ahead of them. The squad scattered into whatever cover the broken rocks provided, returning fire as plasma bolts streaked past, scorching the stone around them. Reyes ducked behind a boulder, exchanging fire with a pair of Draythan soldiers advancing along the ridge, while Diaz worked her way to a better firing position nearby. "We're pinned down," Grant called out. "That Strider's got us bracketed. We can't move without getting hit." Reyes risked a glance around his cover and saw the Strider machine Grant meant, a tall walking platform bristling with weapons, slowly advancing along the ridge, spraying suppressive fire across their position. "Cade, do you still have that anti-armor charge?" Reyes called. "One left, Sarge." "Make it count. Diaz, cover him." Cade broke from cover, sprinting low across open ground as Diaz laid down covering fire, forcing the nearest Draythan soldiers to duck back. He reached a firing position close enough to the advancing Strider and fired the charge directly into its lower joints. The explosion tore through the machine's leg supports, and it collapsed sideways with a groan of tortured metal, crashing down the slope of the ridge in a shower of sparks. "Strider's down," Cade shouted, scrambling back to cover, as the remaining Draythan soldiers pressed their attack, undeterred by the loss of their machine. The fight continued, brutal and close, the squad slowly being pushed back along the ridge, despite their best efforts. Whitfield, still weak from his earlier wound, took a second hit to the leg and went down hard, and it was only Okafor's quick action dragging him behind cover that kept him from being finished off entirely. "We're running low on ammo, Sarge," Nair called out. "I don't know how much longer we can hold this position." Reyes gritted his teeth, looking around at his squad, tired, wounded, running low on everything they needed to keep fighting. He keyed his radio, voice tight with urgency. "Widow's Reach, this is Ghost Squad. We are engaged with hostile forces, taking casualties, requesting immediate support if you have it." For a moment, static was the only response, and Reyes feared the worst. Then Voss's voice cut through, calm and steady. "Ghost Squad, hold your position. We are 90 seconds out. Keep your heads down." 90 seconds had never felt so long in Reyes's life. Above the ridge, the Widow's Reach dropped out of the low clouds like a shadow falling from the sky, its weapons already tracking the Draythan forces below. Voss stood at the tactical station, watching the battle unfold on the display in real time. "Target the Strider unit and the main infantry line," she ordered. "Keep clear of the ground team's position, but make it hurt." "Weapons locked, Commander," Marlowe confirmed. "Fire." The Widow's Reach opened up with its ventral cannons, streaks of concentrated energy tearing down from the sky and slamming into the Draythan line along the ridge. The remaining Strider machine was vaporized in a single hit, and the Draythan infantry line scattered in confusion as explosions tore through their formation. On the ground, Reyes and his squad watched in stunned silence as the sky itself seemed to open fire on their enemies. The Draythan soldiers who had pinned them down for the last several minutes suddenly caught in a storm of destruction from above. "That's our ride," Diaz said, a note of disbelief in her voice, as the long black shape of the Widow's Reach descended toward the ridge, weapons still firing to clear the remaining resistance. The ship settled into a hover just above the ridgeline, a boarding ramp extending down toward the battered survivors of Ghost Squad. A figure in dark combat armor appeared at the top of the ramp, weapon raised, providing covering fire as the ship's crew moved to assist the exhausted ground team. "Move, move, move," Reyes shouted, and the squad scrambled up the slope toward the waiting ramp, Okafor and Grant half carrying Whitfield between them, the rest providing covering fire as best they could with their dwindling ammunition. At the top of the ramp, Commander Arya Voss herself stood waiting, her weapon steady, eyes scanning the chaos below with the calm focus of someone who had done this many times before. "Sergeant Reyes, I presume," she said, as he reached the ramp, breathing hard, his uniform torn and stained with dust and blood that wasn't entirely his own. "That's me," Reyes said. "Thank you for coming, Commander." "Don't thank me yet," Voss said, a faint, sharp smile crossing her face as the last of Ghost Squad scrambled aboard behind him. "We still have to get off this rock." The boarding ramp sealed shut behind them, and the Widow's Reach rose sharply into the sky, leaving the smoking ruins of the Drathan assault force behind on the ridge below. But as the ship gained altitude, new alarms began sounding across the bridge, and Marlowe's voice carried a fresh note of urgency. "Commander, we've got a problem. The 2 escort ships found another way around the canyon, and they've called in reinforcements. We've got 6 enemy warships converging on our position, and they're closing fast." Voss's eyes hardened as she looked out at the darkening sky, where the first distant shapes of approaching Drathan warships were already becoming visible against the stars. Getting to the ground team had been the easy part. Now came the hard part, getting all of them out alive. A few minutes earlier, as the ramp had sealed shut behind the last of Ghost Squad, Reyes had taken a moment to look around at the interior of the ship that had just saved his squad's lives. It was not what he had expected. The stories about the Widow's Reach painted a picture of a grim, brutal vessel crewed by hardened criminals, with little regard for anything beyond survival. What he saw instead was a ship that, while clearly battle-worn, was kept in careful working order by a crew that moved with practiced efficiency, each person clearly trusting the others to do their part. "This way," said a woman near the bottom of the ramp, gesturing for the exhausted squad to follow her deeper into the ship. She introduced herself briefly as Petty Officer Raina Cole, one of the Widow's Reach's medical staff, and led them toward the ship's small but well-equipped medical bay. "Dr. Farrow will want to look at your wounded first." "Thank you," Reyes said, still slightly stunned by how quickly everything had happened. Days of careful, desperate survival, and now, suddenly, they were somewhere with walls, and light, and people whose entire purpose in that moment was to help them. Cole gave him a small, tired smile, the kind that came from someone who had seen this exact reaction before, on other rescued soldiers from other desperate situations. "You get used to the whiplash after a while, Sergeant. Rest while you can. Something tells me the commander's not done with this fight yet." She was right, of course. The ship shuddered under its first hit only minutes later, and the calm of the medical bay was quickly replaced by the tense urgency of a battle that had only just begun. On the bridge, as the Widow's Reach climbed away from the ridge, Voss studied the growing cluster of enemy contacts on her tactical display with the focused calm of someone who had faced worse odds before, even if she couldn't always remember exactly when. "Talk to me about those escort ships that found the canyon route," she said to Marlowe. "How did they get around so fast?" "My guess, Commander, is they had a second team already stationed on the far side of the mountain range, likely watching for exactly this kind of maneuver," Marlowe said. "The Drathan may not fly like us, but they're not stupid. If they've had time to build a forward base on this world, they've had time to learn a few lessons about how we operate too." "Noted," Voss said. "Chen, I don't want to give them the chance to set another trap. Best course to open space?" "Working on it, Commander," Chen said, her eyes flicking rapidly between the sensor display and the terrain map. "There's a narrow valley, about 40 kilometers north, that should keep us shielded from direct sensor contact a little longer, but it'll add time to our escape route." "Take it," Voss said. "Time we can manage. A direct hit from 6 warships, we cannot." The ship banked north, following Chen's chosen route, weaving low over the jagged terrain of Kelvar, as the first of the pursuing Drathan ships began to close the distance behind them. In the auxiliary areas of the ship, crew members not directly needed on the bridge prepared for what was clearly shaping up to be a difficult fight, checking weapon systems, securing loose equipment, and bracing for the impacts that were sure to come. Down in the medical bay, Reyes felt the ship shift and dive beneath him, and understood, with the grim clarity of a soldier who had spent his life around combat, that Ghost Squad's ordeal was not yet over. They had escaped the ground. Now they had to survive the sky. Before the fighting resumed in earnest, Reyes made his way through the ship's narrow corridors, checking on each member of his squad in turn. He found Nair sitting quietly near the auxiliary bay, cleaning her rifle with the same careful precision she brought to everything, even in the middle of a warship preparing for battle. "How are you holding up?" he asked, taking a seat across from her. "Tired," Nair admitted. "Tired in a way that sleep probably won't fix for a while. But alive, that counts for something." "It counts for a lot," Reyes said. Nair glanced up at him. "You think we made the right call, trusting this ship, even with everything the stories say about it?" Reyes considered the question honestly before answering. "I think the alternative was dying on that ridge, or starving in that cave, or walking 200 kilometers through hostile territory, with no guarantee we'd make it. Whatever else is true about the Widow's Reach, it came when nothing else did. That matters more to me right now than any story." Nair nodded slowly, seeming to accept the answer, and returned to her work on the rifle. Reyes moved on, checking in briefly with Grant, who sat near a viewport watching the terrain blur past below, and with Cade, who had finally allowed himself to rest, now that the radio was no longer his sole responsibility. It was Okafor he found last, still tending to Whitfield in the medical bay, though the young man was resting more easily now under Dr. Farrow's care. "He'll be all right," Okafor said, before Reyes could even ask. "Dr. Farrow's better equipped than anything we had in the field. Whitfield's lucky it wasn't worse." "We're all lucky," Reyes said quietly, looking around at his squad, battered and exhausted but alive, aboard a ship that, days ago, none of them would have ever expected to be their salvation. The moment of quiet did not last long. Moments later, the ship shuddered hard under a fresh volley of enemy fire, and the alarms sounding through the corridors made it clear that whatever peace they had found in the last few minutes was, for now, over. "Everyone to stations," Reyes called, and the squad scrambled to respond, moving with the practiced urgency of soldiers who understood that the fight for their lives was not yet finished, no matter how far they had already come. Inside the Widow's Reach, Ghost Squad sat in the cramped medical bay, while the ship's medic, a quiet older man named Dr. Farrow, moved quickly between the wounded. Whitfield lay on one of the cots, his leg wound finally treated properly, color slowly returning to his face as the pain medication took hold. "You're going to keep that leg," Farrow told him gruffly. "But only because you're lucky, not because you were smart. Next time, tell someone when you're hit the first time, not the third." "Yes, Doc," Whitfield mumbled, already half asleep from exhaustion and relief. Reyes stood near the doorway, watching over his squad, feeling the strange, disorienting relief of being somewhere with walls and light after days on the run. But the relief was short-lived. The ship suddenly shuddered hard, throwing anyone not seated off balance, and alarms began blaring through the corridors. "What was that?" Diaz asked, catching herself against a wall. "That," came Voss's voice over the ship's intercom, calm despite the obvious tension underneath it, "was the first shot from one of 6 Drathan warships currently converging on our position. All hands, brace for evasive maneuvers." Reyes felt his stomach twist. They had made it off the planet, only to fly straight into a fight the Widow's Reach might not win. He made his way quickly toward the bridge, wanting to see for himself exactly what they were facing. The bridge was a controlled storm of activity when he arrived. Every console blinked with warnings, and Voss stood at the center of it, giving orders in a voice that never rose but somehow cut through all the noise around her. "Talk to me," Voss said to Marlowe. "6 confirmed hostiles, Commander, closing from 3 directions. 2 escort class, closing fast from the canyon route, 2 more escort class converging from the northern patrol line, and 2 heavier cruiser-class ships moving in from high orbit, weapons already charging." "Options," Voss said. "Not many good ones," Marlowe admitted. "If we try to outrun them in atmosphere, the escorts will catch us before we clear orbit. If we make a stand here, we're outgunned 2-to-1 at least, and that's before the cruisers get in range." Reyes stepped further onto the bridge, unable to stay silent. "Is there anything my squad can do? We didn't come this far just to watch you fight our battle for us." Voss glanced at him, a flicker of something like respect crossing her face. "Your squad just spent the better part of a week surviving on a hostile planet with almost nothing. I think you've done your part, Sergeant." "With respect, Commander, we're still breathing. That means we can still fight." Voss studied him for a moment longer, then nodded once. Fine. Marlowe, get Sergeant Reyes and any of his squad who are fit to fight down to the auxiliary weapon stations. We're going to need every gun we have. While Reyes hurried back to gather what remained of his squad, the Widow's Reach banked hard, diving lower toward a cluster of jagged mountain peaks that rose from the planet's surface like broken teeth. Chen, talk to me, Voss said. I've got an idea, Commander, Chen said, her hands already moving across the flight controls with practice speed. Those two escort ships coming from the canyon route are fast, but they're not built for tight maneuvering in mountainous terrain. If I can lure them into the peaks, we might be able to lose them the same way we lost their friends earlier. And the other 4 ships? That's the part you're not going to like, Chen admitted. We can't outrun the cruisers in open space, not with our current engine output. If we want a real shot at getting clear, we need to buy time to charge the auxiliary drive. How much time? 6 minutes, Commander. Maybe 7. Voss's jaw tightened. 6 minutes against 4 warships, 2 of them heavy cruisers, was a very long time in the middle of a fight like this. Do it, she said. Marlowe, get every weapon system online. We're going to need to make those 6 minutes count. The Widow's Reach dove toward the mountain range, the 2 pursuing escort ships following close behind, weapons firing bright streaks of energy that scorched the rock formations on either side, as the ship weaved between the narrow gaps in the peaks. Chen flew with a precision that bordered on reckless, threading the ship through gaps that seemed impossibly narrow, forcing the pursuing escorts to either follow at a dangerous speed or fall back. One escort ship, its pilot either braver or more foolish than the other, tried to follow too closely, and clipped its wing against an outcropping of rock, sending it spinning out of control into the side of the mountain, in a bright flash of destruction. One down, Marlowe reported, a note of grim satisfaction in his voice. Second escort is falling back, Commander, Chen added. I don't think its pilot liked what happened to their friend. Good, Voss said. That buys us a little breathing room. Status on the cruisers? Closing fast, Commander. We'll be in their weapons range within the next 90 seconds. Down in the auxiliary weapons bay, Reyes and the fittest members of Ghost Squad, Diaz, Nair, and Grant among them, had taken up positions at the ship's secondary gun stations, hastily briefed by one of the Widow's Reach's regular crew on how to operate the unfamiliar equipment. These systems track automatically, the crew member explained quickly, a young man named Ortiz, who looked barely older than Cade. Your job is just to confirm targets, and adjust for anything the automatic system misses. Should be simple enough. Define simple, Diaz muttered, strapping herself into the gunner's seat. You'll know it when incoming fire stops being simple, Ortiz said, only half joking, before hurrying off to his own station. The ship shuddered again as the first shots from the pursuing cruisers found their mark, glancing blows that shook the whole vessel but did not breach the hull. Warning lights flared across the auxiliary bay as the automatic tracking systems locked onto incoming targets. Here we go, Nair said, gripping her controls tightly, as the first wave of return fire lit up the screens in front of her. On the bridge, Voss watched the tactical display with narrowed eyes as the 2 Drathan cruisers closed the distance, their heavier weapons now well within range. The Widow's Reach rocked under a series of glancing hits, sparks flying from a damaged console near the back of the bridge. Shields down to 60%, Marlowe reported. Auxiliary drive charging, 4 minutes remaining. They're focusing fire on our port side, Voss noted. Chen, roll a starboard, spread the damage more evenly. Copy, Commander, Chen said, adjusting the ship's flight path with quick, practiced movements, exposing a different section of the hull to the incoming fire, while giving the damaged systems a chance to stabilize. Down in the auxiliary bay, Reyes and his squad fought their own small part of the larger battle, tracking incoming fighters that had launched from the 2 cruisers, small, fast attack craft trying to slip past the Widow's Reach's main defenses and strike at weaker points along the hull. Fighter, bearing 270, coming in fast, Grant called out, and Reyes swung his gun station toward the indicated position, firing a burst of tracking fire that clipped the small craft's wing, sending it tumbling away from the ship trailing smoke. Nice shot, Diaz said, firing her own weapon at a second fighter that had appeared on her side of the ship. The battle raged on, the Widow's Reach taking hit after hit, while its crew and the borrowed soldiers of Ghost Squad fought to keep the fighters at bay and buy the precious time needed for the auxiliary drive to finish charging. Slowly, the ship's return fire began to take its toll, one enemy fighter after another falling away from the fight, until only the two heavy cruisers remained, still closing steadily, still firing with weapons far more powerful than anything the smaller fighters had carried. Auxiliary drive at 90%, Marlowe reported. 1 minute to full charge. Shields at 30%, Commander, another crew member added grimly. We can't take much more of this. Voss's eyes remained fixed on the tactical display, watching the two cruisers close the final distance, weapons charging for what looked like a finishing strike. Chen, the moment that drive is ready, I want us gone. Understood? Understood, Commander, Chen said, her hands steady on the controls, despite the tension clear in her voice. The seconds ticked by, each one feeling impossibly long as the two cruisers bore down on the battered Widow's Reach, their weapons finally reaching full charge, ready to unleash a final devastating volley. Drive at 100%, Marlowe shouted. Ready on your mark, Commander. Chen, punch it, Voss ordered. The Widow's Reach surged forward with a burst of speed that pressed every soul aboard back into their seats, the auxiliary drive flaring to life just as the two cruisers fired their final volley. The blast tore through the space where the ship had been only a fraction of a second before, missing by the narrowest of margins as the Widow's Reach shot forward, faster than any Drathan ship in the system could hope to follow. On the bridge, a tense silence held for several long seconds before Marlowe finally spoke. Commander, we're clear. Both cruisers have fallen out of pursuit range. We did it. A ragged cheer went up across the bridge, quickly spreading through the rest of the ship as word passed from station to station. In the auxiliary weapons bay, Reyes let out a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding, looking over at Diaz, Nair, and Grant, all of them wearing the same expression of stunned, exhausted relief. We made it, Diaz said quietly, almost like she didn't quite believe it herself. We made it, Reyes agreed. But as the adrenaline of the fight slowly faded, a new thought settled over him, quiet and heavy. They had escaped Kelvar, escaped the Drathan fleet, escaped a fight that should have ended very differently. But the cost of it all, the friends lost before the Widow's Reach ever arrived, the days spent hiding and running and fighting just to survive, none of that simply disappeared, because they had finally made it out alive. Whatever came next, Ghost Squad would carry Kelvar with them for a long time. Once the ship had settled into a steady cruise well clear of any Drathan patrol routes, Voss called a short debrief on the bridge, gathering her senior crew along with Reyes to go over what had just happened and what still needed to be done before they reached safe territory. Damage report, she said to Marlowe. Hull integrity holding at 70%, Commander. We took heavier damage to the port engine housing than I'd like, but nothing that will stop us from reaching the nearest fleet station for proper repairs. Shields will need a full recharge cycle before we're combat ready again, but that's standard after an engagement like this one. Casualties? None among the crew, Commander. A few minor injuries from the impacts, nothing Dr. Farrow can't handle. Marlowe glanced toward Reyes. Your people held their own down in the auxiliary bay, Sergeant. That fighter Corporal Diaz clipped near the end there probably saved us a nasty hit to the secondary shield generator. They're good soldiers, Reyes said simply, though the words carried a note of quiet pride. They are, Voss agreed. Good enough that I'd take them onto this ship permanently, if command would ever allow it. Which they won't. She allowed herself a small, wry smile at that. Some rules even the Widow's Reach can't break. The debrief continued a while longer, working through the details of their course back toward friendly territory, the timeline for repairs, and the reports that would need to be filed regarding the engagement at Kelvar. Reports that Voss suspected would draw more than a little unwanted attention from Fleet Command, given that the mission had technically fallen well outside the Widow's Reach's assigned patrol zone. You're going to catch trouble for this, aren't you? Reyes asked, once the other officers had dispersed to their various duties. Going off route to reach us. Probably, Voss admitted. Command doesn't much like it when this ship makes its own decisions about which distress calls are worth answering. But it won't be the first time, and I doubt it'll be the last. I'm sorry to have caused you that trouble, Commander. Voss shook her head. You didn't cause anything, Sergeant. Command's decision to abandon this system caused it. All I did was refuse to go along with it. If there's trouble waiting for me over that, I'll take it gladly, every time, over the alternative. That evening, as the ship continued its steady journey away from Kelvar, Reyes found Diaz sitting quietly near one of the ship's small observation windows, looking out at the stars in a silence that felt heavier than simple tiredness. "You all right?" he asked, taking a seat beside her. Diaz was quiet for a long moment before answering, just thinking about Danny and Amara. Feels strange, being safe now, after everything, and knowing they're not here for it. Reyes nodded slowly. He had been thinking much the same thing himself, in the quiet moments since they'd boarded the ship. It doesn't feel right, does it? Making it out, when they didn't. "No," Diaz said. "It doesn't." "For what it's worth," Reyes said, after a moment, "I don't think surviving makes their loss mean any less. I think it means we owe it to them to remember what happened out there, and to make sure it means something, going forward." Diaz looked over at him, a faint, tired smile crossing her face. "That's very deep for someone who was, 3 days ago, eating ration bars that tasted like cardboard." Reyes managed a small laugh at that, the first genuine one he'd allowed himself in what felt like a very long time. "Don't get used to it, Corporal. I've used up my quota of deep thoughts for the week." They sat together in comfortable silence after that, watching the stars pass slowly outside the window, each carrying their own quiet grief, alongside the relief of having survived, the way soldiers had always carried such things, one day at a time. Elsewhere on the ship, Lieutenant Chen sat in the pilot's ready room, going over the flight data from the escape, replaying the tightest moments of the run through the mountain peaks, and the desperate dash to outrun the pursuing cruisers. It was a habit she had picked up early in her career, long before the Widow's Reach, back when she had still been flying cargo runs on the wrong side of the law. Study every close call, she had learned, because the next one would always demand something new. Marlowe found her there, 2 cups of the same warm drink Voss favored in hand, and set one down beside her without a word. "You always do this after a fight?" he asked, settling into the seat across from her. "Every time," Chen said, not looking up from the display. "You'd be amazed how many mistakes look obvious afterward. That felt like the only option in the moment." "Doesn't look like you made many mistakes today," Marlowe said, glancing at the flight data himself. "That maneuver through the canyon alone probably saved us from a much longer fight." "Probably," Chen agreed. "But probably isn't the same as certainly. I like to know the difference, in case there's a next time." "With this ship," Marlowe said, allowing himself a small, tired laugh, "there's always a next time." Chen finally looked up at him, a faint smile crossing her face. "That's exactly why I keep doing this. Cheers, Marlowe." They touched their cups together in a quiet, informal toast, the kind shared between soldiers who had faced danger together, often enough that words no longer needed to carry the full weight of what they meant. In her private quarters, Commander Voss reviewed the final tactical reports from the engagement, noting with grim satisfaction that the Widow's Reach had come through the fight, bloodied but intact, and every member of Ghost Squad, along with her own crew, had survived. It was not always the outcome her missions produced. She had lost soldiers before, on other runs, other rescues that had not gone quite so cleanly, and she carried those losses the same way Reyes carried his. Tonight, at least, was not one of those nights. She set the reports aside and allowed herself a rare moment of stillness, thinking about the 12 soldiers now resting somewhere aboard her ship, soldiers who, only hours before, had believed themselves abandoned by everyone who was supposed to have their backs. It was a feeling Voss understood better than most people might expect from someone who commanded a ship as feared as the Widow's Reach. She had felt it herself once, a very long time ago, before circumstances and a different commander's decision had given her the chance to become something more than what the fleet's paperwork had once written her off as. It was, she thought, as good a reason as any to keep doing what she did, mission after mission, regardless of what the official rules said about which distress calls deserved an answer. Outside her small viewport, the stars continued their slow, silent passage, indifferent to the battles fought beneath them, indifferent to the lives saved or lost in their light. But somewhere among those stars, 12 more soldiers were alive tonight who might not have been, and for Voss, that was reason enough to call the mission a success, whatever cost it might bring from Fleet Command in the days ahead. 3 days after leaving Kelvar behind, the Widow's Reach cruised quietly through open space, far from any Drathan patrol routes. finally giving its crew and its unexpected passengers a chance to rest. The ship still carried the marks of the battle, scorched hull plating, a few systems still being repaired by the engineering crew, but it was alive, and so was everyone aboard it. Reyes sat in the mess hall with the surviving members of Ghost Squad, sharing a meal that, while still simple, tasted far better than anything they'd eaten in the caves of Kelvar. Whitfield, his leg now properly healed thanks to Dr. Farrow's care, was back to cracking jokes, much to the relief of everyone who had missed his usual humor during the darkest days on the planet. "So," Whitfield said, gesturing with his fork, "which one of you wants to explain how we ended up owing our lives to the most feared ship in the fleet?" "I'll take that as a compliment," said a voice from the doorway, and the squad looked up to see Commander Voss entering the mess hall, along with Lieutenant Chen and a few other members of the ship's crew. "Wasn't meant as an insult, Commander," Whitfield said quickly, sitting up a little straighter. Voss waved a hand, taking a seat at the table with the ease of someone who didn't stand much on formality when it wasn't needed. "Relax, Private. I know what people say about this ship. Most of it's true, one way or another." "Then how'd you end up flying it?" Diaz asked, curious despite herself. Voss was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "Because someone has to fly the missions no one else will take," she finally said. "Every fleet needs a ship willing to go where the official rules say not to go. The Widow's Reach is that ship. Has been for a long time, under a few different commanders." "And the crew?" Reyes asked. "The stories say this ship is crewed by prisoners." "Some of us were," Voss admitted, without hesitation or shame. "Chen here was serving time for a smuggling charge before she ended up flying for the fleet's most dangerous missions instead. Marlowe spent 15 years in a penal colony before this ship gave him a second chance. We're not saints, Sergeant, but we're soldiers, same as you, and we don't leave people behind if there's any way at all to get to them." Reyes thought about the last week, the days spent hiding in caves, rationing water, fighting for every kilometer of ground on a hostile planet, and finally, the desperate battle to escape a fleet that should have ended the Widow's Reach's story for good. He thought about how close it had come to going very differently, and how, in the end, a ship with a reputation for danger and darkness had been the only one willing to come back for 12 soldiers, that everyone else had already written off. "For what it's worth, Commander," Reyes said, "I don't think the stories give you enough credit." Voss allowed herself a small, rare smile. "Careful, Sergeant. Keep talking like that, and people might start thinking this ship isn't so dangerous after all." "Oh, I don't know about that," Diaz said, a small grin of her own appearing. "I've seen how Lieutenant Chen flies. I'm pretty sure that alone qualifies as dangerous." Chen laughed, raising her cup in a mock toast. "I'll take that as a compliment too." Later that evening, Reyes found himself alone on the observation deck near the rear of the ship, looking out at the vast field of stars, stretching out in every direction. It was quiet up here, away from the noise of the mess hall, giving him space to think about everything that had happened. He thought about the soldiers of Ghost Squad who hadn't made it, 2 good people lost in the early days of the ambush, before they'd even reached the safety of the cave system. Their names would go into a report somewhere, filed away among thousands of others from a war that showed no sign of ending soon. It didn't feel like enough, but it was what the fleet system allowed, and Reyes had learned a long time ago that some things simply had to be carried quietly, rather than fixed. "Mind some company?" Voss's voice came from behind him, and Reyes turned to see the commander approaching, 2 cups of something warm in her hands. She offered him one, and he accepted it gratefully. "Not at all, Commander." They stood together in silence for a while, watching the stars pass slowly by outside the viewport. "You did good work down there, Sergeant," Voss finally said. "Keeping your squad alive as long as you did, with as little as you had. That's not easy, even for soldiers who've seen a lot of combat." "We lost 2, Reyes said quietly, "before your ship ever got the distress call." "I know," Voss said, her voice softening slightly. "I read the reports. You did everything right, Sergeant. Sometimes right isn't enough to save everyone. That's just the truth of this kind of war, whether we like it or not." Reyes nodded slowly, staring out at the stars. It wasn't the kind of comfort that made the loss hurt less, but it was honest. And after everything Ghost Squad had been through, honesty felt like the only kind of comfort worth having. "Can I ask you something, Commander?" "Go ahead." "Why'd you really come for us?" Kelvar wasn't your assigned patrol. Command hadn't ordered a rescue. You could have left us written off, same as everyone else seemed ready to do. Voss considered the question for a long moment before answering. Because somewhere along the way, this fleet decided that some lives were worth less trouble to save than others. I don't happen to agree with that math. Maybe it's because of where I came from, or the people I command, or just because I've seen too many good soldiers get left behind by decisions made far away from any actual battlefield. Whatever the reason, as long as I'm flying this ship, if there's a beacon out there calling for help, and there's any way at all to reach it, I'm not going to be the one who decides those lives aren't worth the trouble. Reyes looked over at her, understanding a little more now about why the Widow's Reach carried the reputation it did, and why, despite everything the stories said, it was also the ship that showed up when no one else would. For what it's worth, Commander, he said. Ghost Squad's grateful. All of us. Just doing the job, Sergeant, Voss said simply. Same as you were, down there on that ridge, fighting to keep your people alive as long as you could. Different ships, same job, in the end. 2 weeks later, the Widow's Reach docked quietly at a forward fleet station near the edge of contested space, delivering the surviving members of Ghost Squad to be processed, debriefed, and eventually reassigned to new units, as was standard after an extended combat loss like the one they had experienced on Kelvar. Before they parted ways, Reyes made a point of finding Commander Voss one last time, catching her on the docking platform as she oversaw the unloading of supplies and the repair schedule for her battered but resilient ship. Commander, he said, offering a salute that Voss returned with slightly more formality than she usually bothered with. Sergeant Reyes, she said, heading off to a new assignment, I take it. Command's reassigning what's left of Ghost Squad to a support unit for a few months. Let everyone recover properly, Reyes said. But I wanted to say thank you, one more time, before we went our separate ways. Not just for me, for all of us. Voss studied him for a moment, then extended a hand, which Reyes shook firmly. Take care of your people, Sergeant, and if you ever find yourself stuck somewhere with no good options left, remember there's at least one ship out there willing to come back, even when the official answer is that it shouldn't bother. I won't forget it, Commander, Reyes said. None of us will. As Ghost Squad made their way off the docking platform toward the station's transport bay, Diaz fell into step beside Reyes, glancing back one last time at the long, dark shape of the Widow's Reach resting in its docking berth, still scarred from the battle at Kelvar, but standing ready for whatever mission came next. You think we'll ever cross paths with that ship again? Diaz asked. Reyes considered the question, thinking about everything that had happened over the past few weeks. The fear, the desperation, and finally, the strange, sharp relief of being rescued by a ship most people were afraid to even talk about. I hope so, he said, because out here, in a war like this, it's good to know there's at least one ship that comes back for the people everyone else has given up on. Behind them, the Widow's Reach powered down its engines for routine maintenance, its crew already receiving word of the next distress call waiting somewhere out among the stars, another group of soldiers, on another hostile world, hoping against hope that someone, somewhere, was still listening. And somewhere in the depths of space, the Widow's Reach prepared once again to answer that call, because that was what it did. That was what it had always done, no matter what the stories said, no matter what reputation it carried. It came back, every single time. Months later, long after Ghost Squad had been reassigned and scattered to new units across the fleet, a report crossed the desk of a mid-level fleet administrator, whose job it was to review after-action files for missions that fell outside standard operating procedure. The report concerned an unauthorized detour by the vessel Widow's Reach into the Kelvar system, resulting in the successful extraction of 12 soldiers previously classified as a total loss. The administrator read the file twice, noting the casualty figures, the tactical summary, the list of Drathan ships engaged and destroyed during the escape. It was, by any measure, an extraordinary result, achieved through means that violated at least 4 separate fleet regulations regarding authorized patrol zones and permitted engagement protocols. He filed the report exactly the way he had filed a dozen similar reports before it, concerning the same ship. Over the years he had held this position. A formal note of reprimand, more procedural than punitive, would be issued to Commander Voss for the unauthorized deviation, and, quietly, in the margin of his own private notes, he wrote a single line that would never appear in any official record. 12 more soldiers went home because of this crew. Whatever the rules say, I cannot call that a mistake. He had written similar notes before, about similar missions. He suspected he would write them again. Sergeant Marcus Reyes eventually found his way to a new assignment, commanding a fresh unit along a different section of the border, the kind of ordinary posting that came after an extraordinary ordeal. He carried the memory of Kelvar with him always, the fear, the hunger, the desperate days of hiding and running, and finally, the strange relief of rescue from a ship most people were too afraid to even speak well of. He made a point, in his new command, of telling every soldier under him about the Widow's Reach, not as a story of fear, but as a reminder of something important. That out among the stars, in a war that too often reduced soldiers to numbers on a casualty report, there were still people, however flawed, however feared, however far outside the official rules they operated, who believed that every distress signal deserved an answer, and every soldier deserved a chance to come home. Diaz eventually made captain, commanding her own recon unit years later, and it was said, though never officially confirmed, that she kept a small, faded patch from the Widow's Reach in her personal effects, a quiet reminder of the ship that had once refused to let her squad become another forgotten statistic. As for the Widow's Reach itself, it continued its work in the years that followed, answering distress calls that other ships considered too dangerous, too far outside the rules, too costly in terms of risk and resources to bother with. Commander Voss remained at its helm, her crew of former criminals and cast-offs continuing to prove, mission after mission, that the measure of a soldier was not the mistakes in their past, but the lives they were willing to risk everything to save. Somewhere out among the stars, another beacon would begin transmitting one day, faint and desperate, from soldiers who believed no help was coming. And somewhere out among the stars, the Widow's Reach would hear it, and turn its course toward the call, because that had always been, and would always be, exactly what it did. Years later, long after the war along the Kelvar border had shifted into new phases and new battles that few outside the fleet would remember by name, a young recruit sitting through orientation aboard a newly commissioned warship asked her training officer a simple question. Why did soldiers still speak, even now, about a ship called the Widow's Reach, when so many other vessels from that era had long since been forgotten? The training officer, a grizzled veteran nearing the end of his own service, thought about the question for a long moment before answering. He told her about a system called Kelvar, and a squad of 12 soldiers left behind when the fleet withdrew, and a ship that no one expected to come back for them, crewed by people the fleet itself had once written off as beyond redemption. He told her about Commander Arya Voss, whose name still appeared in more reprimands than commendations in the official record, and whose crew had nonetheless pulled more soldiers out of hopeless situations than almost any other vessel in the fleet's long history. They weren't heroes, in the way people usually mean that word, the old officer said. They were criminals, cast-offs, people the system had given up on. But when it mattered, when soldiers were stranded with nothing left, and no one coming, that ship came anyway. Every single time. That's why people still talk about it, even now. Because in a war that too often treats soldiers like numbers on a report, the Widow's Reach proved that some people, whatever their past, still believed every one of those numbers was a life worth saving. The recruit sat with that answer for a long while after the lesson ended, and though she would go on to serve many years aboard many different ships, she never quite forgot the story of Ghost Squad, and the dangerous ship that had come back for them, against every rule that said it shouldn't have bothered. It was, in the end, exactly the kind of story that soldiers told each other in the dark, quiet hours before a difficult mission, not because it made the danger ahead any less real, but because it reminded them of something worth holding on to, even in the worst of it, that somewhere out among the stars, there would always be someone willing to answer the call, no matter how far outside the rules that answer had to travel. The end.